So good afternoon again, and it is Monday. I'm Natalie, and this is Behind the Mask with Diran. We are really excited today to have our really good friend Nate with us. Nate, would you please introduce yourself?
My name is Nate Peterson. I'm the executive director out at the Mesa Police Association out in Mesa, Arizona. Our department consists of about 800 or so sworn and about 2,000 civilians out here in lovely Arizona. It's only 110 today, so we're basking in the sun.
It is warm today. Nate, thank you so very much for taking the time and being with us today. I know especially during this climate, we really appreciate your time. I wanted to see, of course, as an officer, we always have things happen to us in the same way as any other first responder. Can you tell me about a trauma that you've experienced within your career that left you with symptoms that affected the rest of your life?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was an officer for 12 years. My career ended with a medical retirement. I broke my hand, and I had 5 surgeries on my hand, and HR had me leave the department. But during my career, I was involved in 2 use of force issues with my firearm, and in between that, those 2 shootings themselves were standalone kind of pillars. But in between that, as I went back to work, I ended up being bit by a blue-nosed pit bull in the testicles. And through my uniform, and the interesting thing is that the trauma element of the dog bite left me with severe elements of trauma. I would go to parties, and if dogs were at the homes, I would leave, and so it affected me inside and outside of work because we were required to go to homes that had dogs. And during that period of time, it was very traumatic. It took me back. There were times where I had to work through fear, and sometimes I couldn't work through those fear over a dog. The help was really offered for the shootings. We got cleared by doctors, checked out at the range, and they really took care of us in those pillar moments. But in between, in what really felt like a small event, turned out to be a very traumatic event. And for years, and we sold our dog to a friend, so at least it ended up in a good home and whatnot. But and like I said, we would go on camping trips. People had dogs, we'd pack up and leave, and it was very hard to regulate for a lot of years.
That sounds extremely traumatic, both physically as well as psychologically. I'm sorry that it happened to you. Tell me, how did you recover from this? It sounds like something that would impact you inside and out.
Yeah, the physical recovery was fairly quick. That element was handled well by the department. The emotional element of that, it's obviously, with it being a sensitive area, it started off as like inside jokes amongst friends, and I actually joke about it now. I think that's one of the things that kind of helped me get over the stigmas. I was embarrassed for a long time. I was embarrassed. I didn't do anything to obviously ask for the dog bite. There wasn't anything I could have used a better tactic on. But the reality is that I really did find humor to be, and the story itself is humorous. As I went through the ER and my squad mates showed up to support me. And that's where I kind of turned my focus on, was away from the trauma element and more to the idea that this is a funny story that not many people are going to get a chance to experience. And let me focus on that element. Let me find where humor can, I mean, and sometimes it goes to the extreme, but humor can be a very big help in dealing with trauma. And so now it's one of those stories I kind of I share with select groups of friends, but ultimately that is one of those pieces that as you use humor to tell a story, and then you realize this is a story that people can enjoy, but ultimately understand what a first responder deals with. It's not simply just shootings, it's not simply just drownings, it's not simply, there are things that happen to you on a regular basis that fall between the cracks. They don't necessarily always make the headlines. They don't sometimes leave the briefing room even. Using humor within a context and within a boundary really kind of helped me get out of that situation. Now it's one of my favorite stories to tell. Once I got the stigma of it being embarrassing, it's too sensitive of an area to initially, that I just didn't want to tell the story to anyone. And when I start telling it, it really took the stigma out of it.
It is really scary. I mean, as a nurse, I've seen some pimple bites, and those can be absolutely devastating. I'm glad that you're okay. And it sounds, A, it sounds petrifying. B, it sounds like you've done a really good job at turning it into into something humorous that you're able to joke about. And that's kind of, correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds to me like it took the power away from the incident, right? In a second that you turned it into something humorous, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that for us, first responders and healthcare workers, I think a lot of the times we go and we turn into humor in order to cope with what is happening with us. And then we often may be joking about something that for a person who is not a first responder, they may think that it's inappropriate. But for us, it's a coping mechanism. Would you agree?
I totally agree. The interesting thing was I've been retired for 3 years, and I actually had a friend who passed away unexpectedly. And what I found was that mechanism isn't as tolerated amongst civilians. And I actually felt very vulnerable for the first time in my life as I sat there and my friend passed away. It wasn't a car accident. It was just a culmination of medical issues in his 30s. And I remember feeling very vulnerable, and there was no one around me to joke with because everybody was in tears and everybody was, holding each other and crying. And I was dying on the inside because I just wanted to have a joke and just find that little piece of, hey, this is how first responders talk. We talk in this element. And so it was a weird moment where I felt so vulnerable. And I remember it took me a week to get past this death, when I felt like I've gone through funerals for friends. I've done, I've been amongst many dead bodies and whatnot, and none of that ever affected me. And I realized that I kind of like that, your guys' term, the mask element there, of when you actually get through that and you realize you're still a person. And for the first time in my life, I felt that death and it stung. It took me by surprise because I was so calloused and would use humor just to get through everything. And at the end of it, I actually had quick closure rather than just throwing a Band-Aid over it. By having that sad moment and by kind of moping around the house for 3 or 4 days, at the end of that, I had closure. And we went to his funeral and laid him to rest. And the interesting thing was, at the end of that, I said, okay, I can move forward. And I don't feel like I have any baggage, where some of the stuff from law enforcement, I still have baggage. There's still stuff that kind of kicks around. I don't dwell on it, but it's just two ways to deal with it, and really took me by surprise.
Do you feel like sometimes we just don't have maybe it's because of the amount of the critical incidents we experience, or maybe because of circumstances that we just simply don't have the time and the space to grieve between the incidences? Would you agree?
Yes, absolutely. The frequency that first responder in any capacity, fire, PD, nurses, I mean, I know that's a very limiting group, but the truth is like anybody who has that repeated response repeated exposure to stress and trauma, it's a coping mechanism just to get through it. Just quickly go on to the next one. And then when you get home, you realize you got to deal with it the next day. And so it just gets shoved off. And so a 25 or 30-year career, I feel like just through normal calls for service, normal days on the job, can really stack up. And the sad part is it's always the fear of retirement, is that that momentum dies off, and all of a sudden you got to deal with reality, and you got to face that. And I think in some aspects I got lucky through a separate incident where I broke my hand and had those surgeries, and ultimately retired. Is I only had 12 years of that repeated response. But I know out here, the new officers are required to do 25 years. They can't retire until they hit 59 and a half. And a lot of the guys out in Phoenix work till they're 30 years on the job. And if you start at 20 and you leave somewhere near 60, that's a lot of years of trauma and continual exposure to it. And I'm really fearful for the future if we don't start ratcheting down treatment, taking care of our own, and finding new places for us to have some kind of blow-off valve that isn't alcohol, that isn't extreme sports, that isn't something that potentially could harm us. And I'm looking forward to that. That's one of the things we do over here. We consistently are looking for new treatments, anything, nothing's off the table. There's light therapy. There's all kinds of cool things that are coming out that has real benefits. And one of the things we try our best at here at the Mesa Police Association is to establish that rapport and say, hey, let's get you some help, take the stigma out of it, and consistently say, hey, this might feel weird. That's okay. But let it feel weird. Let it be weird for a minute. You're letting your guard down. No one's going to harm you. And as we kind of progress there, all of a sudden, first time in sometimes a career, you have someone who's able to experience an emotion that they've bottled up for so many years, and it's overwhelming. But they do it amongst, a lot of times they will take 6 months off from work, a short-term disability, and they decompress. And the interesting thing, at the end of that 6 months, they are normally a different person altogether. And I think the fear of losing an edge, I can speak personally, the fear of losing the edge to handle the world is what you're afraid of. And so doing that within safety, doing that amongst a network of people who care for you is very important. And initially, every single officer I work with is resistant to help because they don't want to lose that edge. There's 1,000 reasons why. But that's where rapport, that's where safe, not in the safe spaces that I think is used around here, but safe, a place where you can actually say, hey, I'm going to let my guard down and no one's going to attack me. No one's going to come out and throw water balloons on my forehead and cause me to go back into a mode of trauma. And that's really one of the things that literature is coming out. There's so many new things on the horizon. I just hope it gets here soon. That's the hope, is quicker the better.
Thank you for talking about the resources that you guys offer. That sounds fantastic. And I know that a lot of other departments, both police departments as well as other first responder departments, there are services that are available. And sometimes people are reluctant to go within their own organizations. And then if that is the case, there are also a lot of other nonprofit organizations as well as EAP and other resources that are available for first responders and frontline responders that are not necessarily work connected. So if you are still worried about, your coworkers or somebody you work with that are, there's going to be some repercussions, you can always go to other resources where you still don't have to explain yourself. Because part of what I think why peer support is different than psychotherapy or other resources is that you don't have to explain to another police officer how does it feel, or you don't have to explain to another nurse who is also responding to COVID-19 how does it feel to take care of a COVID-19 patient, or how scary it is to not have a mask. And it takes out all of that aspect of needing to explain things, and I feel like many times it would make it easier.
Yeah. I totally agree. That is such a good point, because I think that's the other fear, is when you go talk to someone who isn't trained in how first responders react and treat their own lives and their friends and whatnot. That could be such a scary moment on top of that, where you're explaining why seeing a death or why seeing something simple triggered you, when I think in movies, which is what people draw from, police officers, firemen, nurses, everyone, they're invincible. Nothing affects them. And the reality is that I don't believe that to be the case, in all cases.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. I think that's a very important message. That's definitely a very, very important message to deliver out. Tell me, how are you and your department is currently being affected by both COVID-19 as well as the protests and the riots?
So our guys out here, our officers, are really showing up to work. Our attendance out here in Arizona is phenomenal. Everyone's coming into work. Now, I don't know if that's because all the ball games were canceled and all the restaurants and bars were closed, but the reality is I think we can lean on the idea that you stepped into a job, and fire has the same response. The fire department out here has the same response. Everyone's showing up to do the job they signed up for. This is really the moment that all the training you've gone through, everything you've dreamt of or you fell into, whichever side you fall into, you finally get a chance to exercise it. So you're the first line defense to whatever happens in the world out there, because everybody's scared at home and sheltering in place. We opened up about 2 weeks ago, and crime, the statistics are just astronomical. We had shootings. So as our officers are still nervous about, we don't know what the health of the public might do to us. We've had a couple cases show up here in Mesa, but our officers are charging in. The type A personality basically has come right to the top. And it's the report I'm hearing back is that it's a little boring, the job right now, as far as nothing proactive is going on. But the truth is, when they're needed, when the officers get there, it's what they trained for. It's what they dreamt of. And so as they're pursuing that, it's the spirits are high, morale's at a good point. And then we had, unfortunately, over the weekend, we had some of the riots show up here in town. And I think the same attitude was funneled into those riots. The reality is we're here to protect all folks. Depending on, it really doesn't matter who it is. The idea is that we want to restore peace, and be a peacemaker. And so the reports I'm hearing back is that everybody's basically excited to get out there and do their job. Now, I say excited. It's hot. It's over the weekend. There's a lot of elements. I don't want to sound campy, but at the same time, there's an element there of like the last line of defense to a city, whether it be health. I know the fire department's been running around taking care of people like crazy, trying to keep the ERs free for folks who actually do have COVID. And so the fire department's become the pseudo healthcare taker in the communities. So everybody's running around trying to do their job to the fullest capacity. My fear is that at some point you run out of steam. You're working long shifts, you're working endless amounts of weeks with no vacation, no time built in to recharge your batteries. And that's my kind of looking forward, is we're trying to be proactive and put a carrot at the end of the stick and say, hey, if we can make it through the COVID, there's a reward at the end, working with city management, city leaders to kind of make sure we take care of those who took care of the community. But that may not be enough. We're hoping for a quick turnaround on both these events. Weeks and weeks of riots is just going to burn out all of the first responders. Anymore, I think out here, everything's just getting zapped by the heat as far as the health goes, and COVID. But the reality is our numbers are still holding steady. So we're just hoping that there's a turnaround of vaccine, obviously, all the stuff that's being reported. But until then, I think the concern really is how long can the first responders hold out at this rate, this capacity, and what's the effect on them? Going in and being nervous, am I going to catch something and then go home and infect my family? There are guys who are sleeping on the couch. There are guys sleeping in trailers. I heard something on the news, a doctor was sleeping in his treehouse. And so there's an effect after you clock out. And so I think that's the thing to be looking out for as a group is what is the long-term effects of what we're doing in the short term. It's only been 3 months, but that 3 months we don't know when it ends, to be honest. I know California, you guys went on additional lockdowns, and the actual mental health of the first responders not being able to go out and do anything is a primary concern, I think, after we get done with the initial, so maybe secondary concern. But I think that's what we got to be looking out for, is how do we take care of those who took care of us while the community was on lockdown. Why we have curfews out here, and after 8 o'clock, how do we stay in our homes but still support? So I think even right now, as we're talking over the computers, I think the technology will catch up. I think we'll have more resources. I think people, at least out here, are starting to recognize that mental health is something to benefit our employees, and it's not just a morale thing. It's not an emotional element. There's something to the mental state of our employees, and I think it's important and to continue prioritizing that mental health state for our employees.
Thank you very much for saying that. And I want to tell you how grateful I am for your guys' support. Because without our police officers, we wouldn't be able to do our job. And we are really, I feel like community have come together to support each other, and first responders came together to support each other, to really assure that as a community as a whole, that we're coming out of this as a stronger and more cohesive community as opposed to the otherwise. And again, super grateful for you guys to keeping us safe and keeping the community safe. Who would be able to do this without you? So thank you for that.
Good part.
I do think that there is going to be a long-term impact that we probably, I know that at least for healthcare, we haven't really seen the full effect of the mental health aspect of how is that going to affect all of us, because a lot of us are at the end. A lot of us are tired from sleeping on a couch, not being able to go to the gym, not being able to go and hang out and grab a beer or grab lunch with each other after the shift. And I think that we'll see how things are going to turn out. Nobody has a crystal ball, but I really hope that people at home are taking care of themselves however they need to and however they can in the safest way possible, while still taking care of yourself as well as not affecting negatively the community around you. So again, thank you so very much. Is there anything else that you wanted to say or to finish with before we will be done today?
I think just from the experience we have through some of the PTSD and some of the traumas that officers and the fire department, all first responders experience, the consistent piece of it is that we hear is that I didn't know there were resources. I didn't know someone would help me get some help me get time off, help me literally just get into a different shift. And so I really would just, if it's something that even in, a lot of times we miss the mark, that we've gone past PTSD, something, we're full blown into PTSD. We stopped past maybe the part we could have worked our way through with counseling, worked our way through simple fixes. They turn into more complex fixes. But I would really just say, anytime there's an inkling that you're going down some mental health path where you don't feel good in any capacity, the stigma, I think, is out the door of asking for help. And so I really just encourage anyone who even, and there's so many ways to do it privately. I love the peer-to-peer stuff. I love all the resources out there. People use their churches, people use, friends of theirs, their personal insurance. There's so many ways to do it now. And really now there's not, the excuses are all kind of been taken away. So find some way to get some help, find someone to talk to, get on Zoom and talk to a long lost friend, whatever it is that really works. I just encourage guys to seek that out, find out what works for them, and seek out all the resources. There's so many resources and so many people want the help. Unless they know you need the help, it's impossible to get those resources. So follow through with that, ask for some help. I know your entire network is built off getting people help in the right places. So if that's the biggest piece, I think, as far as a sign off here, is just ask for some help, ask for some resources, and there is no stigma to it.
Thank you so very much for being with us today and this wonderful, wonderful message. We're very grateful having you on.
Thank you for having me.